On Sunday morning, March 1st, 2026, Donald Trump picked up the phone from Mar-a-Lago and called The Atlantic magazine. Outside, the world was still absorbing the fact that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the man who had ruled Iran with absolute authority for 35 years, had been killed hours earlier in a joint American-Israeli airstrike that Trump himself had ordered. The bombs were still falling on Tehran. Iranian missiles were already hitting Dubai. 3 American service members were already dead. And Trump, from his Florida residence while Air Force One prepared to fly him back to Washington, chose this moment to deliver a message to the world. Iran, he said, wanted to talk. He said he had agreed. He said they would be speaking soon. They want to talk, and I have agreed to talk, so I will be talking to them. That was Sunday morning, March 1st, 2026. 14 hours later, Ali Larijani, Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, one of the most powerful men in what remains of the Iranian government, the man who had just been named by the Wall Street Journal as the very person who had allegedly reached out to the United States seeking negotiations, posted 4 words on X that detonated against Trump's statement like a second airstrike. We will not negotiate with the United States. 4 words. No ambiguity, no diplomatic hedging, no nuance. We will not negotiate. 14 hours between 2 statements that cannot both be true. Someone told the entire world something that was not accurate. And the question of who and why and what it means for every human being caught between these 2 governments right now, that is what we are going to answer in this video. This is not a minor diplomatic discrepancy. This is not the kind of contradiction that gets filed under both sides say different things. Who can know? This is 2 governments in the middle of an active shooting war, making mutually exclusive claims to the entire world simultaneously about whether they are prepared to stop shooting. And the stakes of getting that question wrong, for the sailors in the Strait of Hormuz, for the families of the American service members already killed, for the 22 million Iranians living in Tehran right now while bombs fall, for every economy tied to Gulf energy, for every country in the region absorbing Iranian drone strikes, are not abstract. They are measured in whether this conflict ends in weeks or metastasizes into something that reshapes the Middle East for a generation. So let us walk through this carefully, because both statements exist in documented form, both came from officials with the authority to make them, and both arrived within the same 14-hour window. The contradiction is not a matter of interpretation, it is a matter of record. Here is the precise sequence of events that produced this contradiction, because the timeline is everything. On Friday, February 28th, the US and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, strikes across Iran that killed Khamenei, killed the head of the IRGC, Mohammad Pakpour, killed Ali Shamkhani, the leader of the National Defense Council, and killed dozens of other senior Iranian officials. Over 200 Iranians died in the opening hours. The same people who had been sitting across the table from American negotiators in the Oman talks, the same individuals whose phone numbers Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner had, whose names appeared on diplomatic cables, who had been negotiating the nuclear framework that was supposed to prevent exactly this scenario, were killed in the strikes. Trump acknowledged this himself, with a striking frankness that deserves to be heard fully. He told The Atlantic, "Most of those people are gone. Some of the people we were dealing with are gone, because that was a big hit." And then, without any apparent awareness of the contradiction embedded in that statement, he added, "They played too cute. He bombed the negotiators. Then he said the new people want to negotiate. Then he criticized the old people for not having negotiated sooner." This is the logical architecture of the Trump statement that landed on Sunday morning, and it requires examination before we can evaluate what came out of Tehran 14 hours later. Then, the Wall Street Journal published something that changed the information environment entirely. The Journal reported, citing sources, that Larijani had reached out to the United States through Omani mediators in the immediate aftermath of Khamenei's killing, signaling a willingness to resume nuclear talks. This report was the foundation upon which Trump's statement to The Atlantic was built. A senior White House official separately confirmed to the Associated Press that Iran's new potential leadership had signaled a willingness to engage with Washington, while noting that the military campaign continues unabated. PBS NewsHour reported the same White House confirmation. The Atlantic interview in which Trump said they want to talk was conducted on Sunday morning, drawing directly on this Wall Street Journal report and the White House official's confirmation. So Trump was not making up the fact of an Iranian diplomatic outreach from nothing. There was a specific report from a specific paper sourced to what the Journal presented as credible diplomatic channels. A White House official confirmed the general thrust of it. Trump amplified it in the most prominent possible way. An interview with a major American publication, published while the strikes were still ongoing. And then Larijani got on X and said, "No, we will not negotiate with the United States." He did not say, "We have not yet decided." He did not say, "Talks are premature." He did not say conditions must first be met. He said we will not negotiate. Full stop. And he went further, posting a separate message that reframed the entire situation from Iran's perspective in language that was not diplomatic in any sense. He wrote that Trump had plunged the region into chaos with his delusional fantasies and now fears more American troop casualties. He accused Trump of turning America first into Israel first and said Trump had sacrificed American soldiers for Israel's power-hungry ambitions. This was not a man who had been secretly reaching out through Omani mediators to restart nuclear talks. This was a man issuing a declaration of absolute non-engagement in language designed to be read inside Iran as defiance and outside Iran as a counter-narrative to Trump's story. Here is the detail that changes how you read the entire contradiction, and this is the part that no mainstream outlet has placed at the center of its coverage. Al Jazeera's correspondent, reporting from Washington, made an observation on Monday that cuts directly to the structural heart of this. She noted there had been conflicting messages from within the Trump administration itself on the question of any diplomatic off-ramp. She said, "At one turn, the president will suggest the possibility that negotiations could resume, and in the next breath, either he or one of his unnamed aides will say that this military campaign will continue, not for days, but perhaps for several weeks, until all goals are achieved." Read that sentence again. Conflicting messages from within the administration itself. This is not just Iran and America saying different things. This is the American government saying different things simultaneously through different channels. Trump told The Atlantic, talks are coming. A White House official told AP, new leadership signaled willingness to engage. And in the same breath, the same White House, the military campaign continues unabated. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, briefing reporters at the Pentagon on Monday, alongside Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane, said the timeline for the campaign could shift longer or shorter than the 4-week estimate Trump had floated. Not concluded, not paused for diplomacy, shifting longer or shorter depending on conditions. These are not the statements of a government that has received a credible Iranian diplomatic outreach and is preparing to respond to it. These are the statements of a government managing multiple narratives simultaneously for multiple audiences, each narrative optimized for a different purpose. Now let us consider what strategic logic would explain Larijani's statement, because dismissing it as simple defiance misses the deeper calculation. Ali Larijani is not a man given to impulsive statements. He is a former parliament speaker, a former nuclear negotiator, a man who has spent decades navigating the labyrinthine politics of the Islamic Republic. He knows exactly how his words land and where. When Larijani posted, "We will not negotiate with the United States" on X, he was communicating to 3 distinct audiences simultaneously. To the Iranian public, who are watching their country bombed and their supreme leader killed and their cities shaken by strikes, this is a statement of national dignity in the face of military humiliation. It says Iran has not been broken. Iran has not come crawling to the conqueror. The armed forces are defending themselves and the government stands firm. To the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who are at this moment firing missiles at 7 countries and managing the most complex military operation in the IRGC's history, this is a signal that political leadership is not about to undercut the military campaign with a diplomatic surrender that makes the deaths of Khamenei and all the others seem not just tragic, but futile. And to the international community, to China, which condemned the strikes, to Russia, which called Khamenei's killing a violation of all norms of human morality, to the United Nations General Assembly, which will eventually weigh in on this conflict. Larijani's statement establishes Iran as a sovereign nation that refused to negotiate at gunpoint, a framing that generates sympathy in the global south and provides legal and moral cover for Iran's own retaliatory actions. "We did not negotiate under bombardment" is a position of dignity. "We reached out through Oman and got bombed anyway" is a position of weakness. Larijani chose dignity. But here is what makes this more complicated than a simple explanation of strategic posturing. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi, on the same day, told Oman's foreign minister Badr al-Busaidi in a phone call that Iran is open to any serious efforts at de-escalation. According to a statement from Oman's foreign ministry, Iran's foreign minister expressed openness. The same government, the same day. 2 officials. One says we will not negotiate. The other says we are open to serious de-escalation efforts. This is not a contradiction between Trump and Iran. This is a contradiction within Iran itself, reflecting the reality of a government navigating a genuine internal tension between its military arm, which is fighting a war, its political arm, which is trying to survive a leadership transition without appearing to capitulate, and its diplomatic arm, which understands that at some point the bombing has to stop and someone has to talk. The question is not whether Iran will eventually engage diplomatically. Every conflict in history eventually produces some form of diplomatic contact. The question is what each side can claim about what that contact means. Who initiated it? and under what conditions it took place. What Trump's statement to the Atlantic was actually doing, and this requires sitting with some discomfort about the way information is weaponized in modern conflicts, was setting a narrative frame in which Iran comes to the table as a defeated party seeking terms, rather than as a sovereign government agreeing to talk as an equal. They want to talk, positions Iran as the supplicant, and I have agreed to talk, positions Trump as the magnanimous victor who is willing to receive their submission. They should have done it sooner, is the victor's rebuke of the vanquished. They waited too long, is the war justified post facto by the outcome. This narrative is politically essential for Trump domestically, where the legal foundation for the strikes has already been called into question. The U.S. strikes on Iran have sparked a significant constitutional debate, with legal scholars noting that only Congress has the right to declare war under the U.S. Constitution, and that the administration has presented what critics describe as insufficient legal justification for a major combat operation against a sovereign nation. Senator Tim Kaine introduced a war powers resolution to stop the strikes. The administration needs a narrative in which Iran's willingness to talk validates the strikes as effective and proportionate. Iran talking confirms Trump's theory of the case. Iran refusing to talk requires a different justification. Larijani just took away the easiest justification available. For the diaspora communities watching this, the Iranian Americans in Los Angeles and New York, who Trump himself referenced celebrating in the streets, the Iranian families in London and Toronto, who have relatives in Tehran right now in a city being bombed, this contradiction lands with a particular weight that the official statements cannot capture, because those communities are not watching a geopolitical chess match. They are watching their family's country in the middle of a war, and the two governments most responsible for what happens next are telling contradictory stories about whether they are going to stop. The Iranian diaspora in particular is fractured in a way that this moment makes visible. Some celebrated Khamenei's death as the end of a regime that had oppressed them for 35 years. Others watched with horror as American bombs fell on a country where their parents and siblings live, regardless of what they think of the government. And both groups are now watching the same 14-hour contradiction between Trump's "they want to talk" and Larijani's "we will not negotiate," and asking the same question: what is actually true? What is actually happening? Is this going to stop or get worse? And the honest answer, documented across every source published on March 2nd, 2026, is that nobody in either government appears to be in a position to answer that question with confidence, because the two sides are not coordinating their public statements. They are competing over the narrative of who controls the outcome of this conflict, and that competition is itself a form of continued warfare by other means. J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon, interviewed by CNBC as all of this was unfolding, said something that cuts through the official statements on both sides with the directness of a man whose institution manages trillions of dollars of exposure to the outcomes of political decisions. He said he believes the odds of a long just peace in the region are higher as a result of the campaign. And then, in the same breath, he warned, as a corollary to that, you've got to expect there'll be cyber attacks or terrorist attacks either here or around the world. Banks may be targets. This is the assessment of a man with no political stake in either narrative. He is not saying Trump lied. He's not saying Larijani told the truth. He's saying, whatever the diplomatic statements say, plan for cyber attacks, plan for terrorism, plan for the kind of non-state, non-conventional retaliation that Iran has spent 4 decades building the infrastructure to execute. The Department of Homeland Security issued a bulletin warning of exactly this threat. Lone wolf and cyber attacks in the homeland, a persistent threat from Iran and its proxies that will almost certainly escalate as the conflict continues. The contradiction between Trump's talk of imminent negotiations and Larijani's flat rejection is not just a diplomatic puzzle, it is a security gap. Every hour that both statements exist simultaneously without resolution is an hour in which Iran's proxies, its sympathizers, and the actors in its extended network are receiving conflicting signals about whether to stand down or escalate. And the historical record strongly suggests that, in the absence of clear de-escalation, those actors default to escalation. Here's the forward question that this contradiction makes unavoidable. Marco Rubio, as Secretary of State, was scheduled to brief Congress on Monday and Tuesday about the intelligence that led to the decision to launch Operation Epic Fury. CIA Director John Ratcliffe was expected to join the legal foundation for the war, the intelligence basis for the strikes, the administration's theory of what happens after 4 weeks of bombing. All of it was going to be laid out before legislators who have constitutionally exclusive authority to declare war and who have not been given that decision. And now, layered on top of that briefing, is the question of whether the diplomatic channel that Trump described to the Atlantic actually exists in the form he described it. If Larijani is telling the truth, if no outreach was made through Omani mediators, if Iran's position is categorical refusal to negotiate, Then the White House official who told AP that Iran's new leadership had signaled a willingness to engage was either misinformed or constructing a narrative. If Trump is telling the truth, if some channel was opened, if some signal was sent, then Larijani's public statement is a domestic performance designed to protect political standing while a different conversation happens in private. The Oman Foreign Ministry statement confirming that Iran's foreign minister expressed openness to serious de-escalation efforts suggests the second interpretation has some factual foundation. But openness to de-escalation efforts is categorically different from what Trump described. It is the difference between I am willing to consider stopping the shooting and I want to talk and make a deal. Trump described the latter. The documented evidence supports only the former. Somewhere in Tehran right now, in whatever secure facility the interim leadership council of three, Pezeshkian, Mohseni Ejei, and Arafi, has established in the chaos of a government that just lost its supreme leader, its IRGC commander, its National Defense Council chief, and dozens of senior officials in a single night, people are making decisions under conditions of pressure that no government in modern history has faced in quite this combination. A leadership vacuum filled by a provisional council with no clear authority hierarchies and no clear mandate. A military in active combat across 7 theaters simultaneously, a population in shock and mourning, an economy already destroyed by sanctions now facing the additional disruption of war, and 2 contradictory public positions in the world's information environment. One that says Iran is reaching for a diplomatic exit, another that says Iran will not negotiate under any circumstances. The question of which one is operationally true will be answered not by what Larijani posts on X or what Trump says to The Atlantic. It will be answered by what happens in the next 48 hours in Oman, in the back-channel communications that have always been the real architecture of U.S.-Iran diplomacy, in whether a phone call happens or does not happen, and whether the strikes pause or intensify. Trump said he was talking to them. Larijani said there will be no talk. One of those statements will be falsified by events within days, possibly hours. And when it is, we will know something important, not just about the diplomatic status of this conflict, but about the reliability of everything both governments have told us since the first bomb fell on Friday night. The world is listening, the contradictions are documented, and the gap between they want to talk and we will not negotiate is exactly the width of every miscalculation, every miscommunication, every accident that has ever turned a contained conflict into something larger and harder to stop. That gap is where the next decision gets made. And right now, no one on either side of it seems entirely sure what the other side actually means.